introduce our EcoTalk speaker today. This is Dr. David Schiffman. He's an interdisciplinary marine conservation biologist whose work looks at using science to protect threatened species. As an Earth Commons and Environmental Studies adjunct, he's taught ocean conservation policy here at Georgetown since 2020. And he also teaches a marine field research methods course where he takes students down to the Florida Keys, where they live on a research vessel with him, go snorkeling, and tag sharks. Yes. His more than 70 peer-reviewed research papers have been cited over 2,500 times, and his public-facing writing has been featured in National Geographic, The Washington Post, Scientific American, globally syndicated op-eds, and a monthly column in Scuba Diving magazine. He's the author of Why Sharks Matter, you can see it right up here, and the upcoming Why Sustainable Seafood Matters from Johns Hopkins University Press. That's going to come out later this year, maybe October.
We're hoping for October.
Yes. In 2025, Washingtonian Magazine named him one of the people most shaping policy in Washington, D.C., and the American Fisheries Society honored him with the Excellence in Public Outreach Award. Follow him on social media at Why Sharks Matter, where he's one of the most followed scientists in the world and is always happy to answer questions about sharks, marine biology, or ocean conservation. And please join me in welcoming my friend, David.
Oh, thank you, Jesse, for that introduction. Thank you all for coming out today on what started off as a pretty gross Friday, but is turning out okay. I hope you'll stick around after for a networking happy hour. I know we have some folks from the local environmental community who have come in today. That's awesome. Stick around and let's chat. For those of you who have not met me before, because I have taught here at Georgetown for 6 years, but I have not met most of you because I teach only Wednesday nights. I live and work here in the Washington, D.C. area, and I run an ocean conservation science, policy, and communications consulting firm. I also do a lot of training and public science engagement and working with the local environmental nonprofit sector, as well as some government agencies, though perhaps less of that lately, to help use science in support of conservation goals. As Jesse mentioned, I teach this ocean conservation science and policy course. There are several of my current and former students here in the room because you are all a bunch of nerds. And I teach this marine biology field research methods course, where students can spend a week with me in Florida over spring break, where we tag sharks, go hiking in the Everglades, as you can see here, snorkel on coral reefs, and all sorts of good stuff. So for the faculty here, as well as colleagues from other institutions who have joined, I'm always happy to collaborate on stuff. I can serve on thesis committees. I'm always happy to guest lecture, of course. Come find me after, let's chat. So the topic of my talk today is what people get wrong about shark conservation. Before we get into that, let's talk about some real facts about what really is happening with shark conservation. So first and foremost, sharks are in trouble. Sharks are some of the most threatened animals in the world. According to the IUCN Red List, it's now about a third of them that are threatened with extinction. Frogs are in worse shape, that's it. They are one of the most threatened groups of vertebrate animals in the world. And the problem is so bad and has gotten worse so fast that this infographic that I helped the IUCN Red List make during grad school is already out of date. It's already worse than this. When most people think about shark conservation, what they think about is shark fin soup and shark finning. That is because this has been by far the most publicized threat, and it's the threat that the most people are most aware of, but it is not the largest threat to sharks or the only significant threat, and it has not been the largest threat to sharks in the lifetime of any current undergraduate student. This slide is not just an excuse for me to post my Seinfeld soup Nazi, no shark fin soup for you sign, though I do love that. Over the last 25 years, consumption of shark fin soup, which is a delicacy in China and Southeast Asia and in those diaspora communities around the world, has declined dramatically. Part of that is because of environmental advocacy. Part of that is because of laws making some of the practices that led to it less easy to do. And a large chunk of it is the Chinese government cracking down on luxury items for mid-level government officials. So it's anti-corruption rather than environmental, but the end result is the same. And you may be thinking, well, that's great. The threat that I've heard of is declining. But remember, I just said that things have gotten worse since I was in grad school. So what's happening? The shark meat trade has exploded over this same time frame. Importantly, the shark meat trade involves different fishing nations, different end markets. Different countries buy shark meat than buy shark fins, and often different species, which means rules that just focus on shark fins do not help with this problem for the most part. I will also note that I've talked to some folks in the environmental community who have said that this, a bowl of shark fin soup, that's evil, that's repulsive. But that, a grilled mako shark steak, that's fine because that's how normal people eat fish. Other than the fact that that makes no damn sense from a conservation perspective, either way, you've got a dead shark on your hands. It's also really racist in ways that are bad in of itself and also counterproductive if our goal is winning hearts and minds. I will also note that the term shark finning is commonly misunderstood and commonly misused. It refers to a specific type of fishing practice and is not a synonym for killing any shark in any way for any purpose. Shark finning refers to a fisherman catching a shark, cutting the fins off of that shark while the boat is at sea, and discarding the carcass so that only the fins are landed. This is done because even though the meat trade is more valuable, pound for pound, a fin is worth more than a fillet. This is unsustainable, this is inhumane, and it's widely condemned, and it's also happening much less these days. So as one example of how this stuff drives me crazy, my students know I rant about wrong information on social media all the time. And they keep coming back, so I guess it's worth it. This was the most shared ocean conservation image on Instagram in 2017, and it went viral with a caption about how shark finning is bad. These sharks are dead. They were killed by fishermen. Their fins will end up in the shark fin trade. They're endangered species in this photo. I wish that this did not happen, but their carcasses have been brought to land, which means that is not shark finning, and banning shark finning would not ban this. Words mean things. And it's not my fault that the words sound very similar. So the shark conservation community is at a bit of a crossroads. More people than ever before want to help sharks and care about sharks and want to help save the ocean, and that's great. But there is intense public debate about what do we do to protect sharks. There's been significant focus on shark finning and the shark fin soup trade. But there's been, as you see in the lower left, a lot of attention on particularly well-known species like great white sharks, which are absolutely not the most endangered species. There's been a lot of flashy, dramatic protests. The woman in the center top spray painted herself silver, put fishing hooks through her back, and hung herself outside of a fish market in Shanghai to protest overfishing. I'm sure you'll be shocked to learn that overfishing continues after that protest. And in the lower right, that's a bumper sticker that one of my jackass friends made when I said, I don't trust any conservation solution simple enough to fit on a bumper sticker. So as an interdisciplinary conservation scientist, I spend a lot of my time thinking about this diagram, the science policy interface. Many of you are familiar with this in some capacity, but it's worth going through. This is a way of visualizing how science influences environmental policy change and what steps it goes through along the way. In this simplified case, what you see here is there's some sort of environmental problem. It's documented and described by scientists. This leads to public concern. This leads to advocacy for change, and voila, policy is changed. And those of you who work in this space know that it's almost never that simple. But some things work almost exactly like this. And there's value in thinking of this as almost like a null hypothesis, in that if it looks different from this, it means something has gone wrong, and you can study what that is. So when we're talking about policy change, there's a few different ways that we can change policy to protect sharks. The number one threat to sharks by far, so much that there's functionally not really a number two threat, is unsustainable fishing practices. That includes, but is not limited to, shark finning. So one school of thought says, well, let's make the fishing practices for sharks more sustainable. These are the so-called target-based tools. And these are things that if you've ever gone fishing at all, you'd be familiar with these rules. They're size limits. It's too small, you throw it back. Quotas, you can only catch this many, and things like that. There's also been a newer suite of policy tools that is aimed to ban all shark fishing or ban all trade in shark products. And these are things like shark sanctuaries and bans on the sale of shark fins. So science, as I try to teach my students, is an incredibly powerful tool for answering questions that start with can. Can we do this? Is this possible? Or sometimes, this is our goal. What can optimize getting to that goal? Or sometimes, what happens if we do this versus this? But science cannot and should not be used to answer questions that start with should. Should we do this? Those are values questions. Those are law questions. Those are morality questions. Science is ill-equipped for this. But people who support sustainable fisheries for sharks, and I will note in the interest of transparency, I am squarely on team sustainable fisheries for sharks. They do so because of beliefs that sustainable shark fisheries can exist and do exist. And sustainable shark fisheries offer some benefit to humans and or sharks not found with total bans. So can sustainable shark fisheries exist and do they exist? Those are science questions. The answer unequivocally yes. This was reviewed in 1998, which is before any of the undergraduates in this room were born. Oh my God. This was an analysis that was performed by my postdoc advisor, Dr. Nick Dolby, as well as a colleague of his. I know not everyone here is an expert in fisheries modeling, so let me orient you here. Any green circle on the map represents a scientifically identified sustainable shark fishery. There are green circles on the map, therefore they do exist. That is all you need to take away from this. The paper itself is really interesting and you can get into the modeling behind this if you want, but confirmed they exist. There are green dots on this map. This paper also found that many shark fisheries that are currently not sustainable can be made sustainable with relatively minor changes, and approaches such as total bans on shark fishing or trade in shark products can play a role, especially for some species, but by themselves cannot solve the shark conservation crisis. Consumer sustainable seafood guides, such as the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch, have identified a variety of shark fisheries as sustainable. The Marine Stewardship Council has certified some shark products as sustainable. NOAA's Fish Watch has identified many. So can these exist? Do they exist? Yes. I also, just to make sure, I surveyed my entire field during my PhD. I asked every member of my field, what do you think about these fundamental issues? And I know not everyone here is an interdisciplinary conservation scientist, but this is a pretty straightforward chart. This is a bar chart. It goes from 0% agreement to 100% agreement. A bigger bar means more people agree. 90% of the shark scientists believe that the solution to the shark conservation crisis is making fishing more sustainable, not banning all fishing or trade in shark products. 90%. Good luck getting 90% of your field to agree on anything. I will do a brief aside here to say that I know that we have representatives from multiple different disciplines in this room. That's awesome. If anyone else wants to answer questions like this for your field, I'd love to work with you on it. Expert assessment and expert solicitation is one of the things my consulting firm specializes in. One of the other things we do is research prioritization via expert solicitation, which means getting everyone in your field together and asking them what's something we don't know now that we should really find out. Would love to chat with people about how to work together on this if you're interested. So also, back to can and do sustainable shark fisheries exist? NOAA had a PR campaign trying to promote US caught shark fisheries as a sustainable food. And as an amateur home cook, I did not think this is how I was going to end up getting quoted in Food and Wine magazine, but it totally counts. I've been quoted in Food and Wine magazine. So hopefully I've convinced you sustainable shark fisheries absolutely can and do exist. That doesn't mean we should do that. It doesn't mean it's the best thing to do, but is it possible to do and has it been done? Absolutely yes. So what about people who support these limit-based policy tools? Well, there's a few reasons why people might do that. One is personal values, which may or may not be cultural in nature. They would say, people who believe this might say something like, I don't really care if it's sustainable. I love sharks. I don't want to see any shark hurt for any reason. And Johnston et al. 2004 reminds us that sometimes it's important for scientists to know our role and shut our mouths. And it is inappropriate of me as a scientist to say your values are wrong, your values are bad. I would never say that. However, there are also people who say factually wrong things about the state of shark conservation, claiming there's no such thing as a sustainable shark fishery. All real scientists know that. And that is something that it is appropriate for scientists to call out in their field of expertise. Just to make sure, I wrote that part of my professional society's code of professional ethics. So the science is clear. Sustainable shark fisheries can exist and do exist. And we've known that for a long time. But there are lots of people, including people who consider themselves quite knowledgeable about this world, who believe they cannot exist and do not exist. Again, this is not, should we do this? This is it possible for it to happen? So I wanted to know what's happening right here in our, going back to our science policy interface. So I spent 2 years of my life during my postdoc right there. What we proposed, or what seemed to be happening, is that some scientific research is reaching the public. Almost everyone who cares about the ocean has heard to some degree sharks are in trouble. But the solutions and the expert support for those solutions was not reaching the public, even though a lot of it was being done by the same labs and published in the same journals. So I wanted to understand what's happening here. Is it bad when that happens? Remember how simple and clean the science policy interface diagram that I showed before was? Generally speaking, the more things that are on there, the less clean it is, the less simple it is, the more things are going wrong. And the worst case scenario of this is called an effort-goal mismatch. And this occurs when groups that are supposed to be working together are working towards mutually exclusive goals, and sometimes are even in conflict. So is it possible to have a sustainable shark fishery? That's a natural science question. Is it possible? Can we do this? But we've answered that question, yes. Why do so many people not know that? That's a social science question. It requires interdisciplinary methodology to answer. And there have long been calls in my field to apply social science and interdisciplinary methodology to questions about shark conservation. But this is a research priority that is simply not being prioritized. You have to look really hard to find it. We looked at all of the conference talks, all of the abstracts that have ever been presented in my professional society, about 1,800 total talks over over more than 30 years. And we found out of 1,800 talks, 21 of them mentioned social science, and 9 of those were mine, including this one. So the overall focus of my research program, as presented here and as has continued since I've done some of this work, is given that sustainable shark fisheries can and do exist, which again doesn't mean we should do that, but is it possible to do that? Given that they do exist, why do so many people believe that they can't and don't exist? When I give public talks, when I talk to people on social media, the overwhelming belief is obviously it's impossible for this to happen. So put slightly more technically, where did these stakeholder groups learn about these issues, and what sort of information is shared through those information pathways? And I'm going to present today on the results of 3 interrelated projects. For those of you who are grad students, once you're not a grad student anymore, you're not supposed to call it chapters, but it's basically the same thing. 3 interrelated projects. One is how this stuff is covered in popular press coverage. One is how it's covered in infotainment documentaries, specifically Shark Week. And one is from the environmental nonprofit sector. So let's first talk about popular press coverage. So media content and discourse analysis is a very, very technical social science field. But what I want you to know today is what members of the public understand about what the environmental problem is and what the solutions are and how they work affects what solutions they support. And people learn about that stuff from the newspaper. Sharks are frequently covered in the popular press, but an analysis from some of my colleagues in Australia found that in less than 10% of those articles did it even mention that sharks are endangered and that's bad and they're ecologically important. Most stories are about sharks biting people or sharks swimming near someone and the person thought they were going to be bitten. But no one had ever looked in more depth at what those shark conservation stories actually covered. So we wanted to do that. So my research questions for this section are, would someone learning about shark conservation by reading the newspaper be well informed, specifically with respect to threats to sharks and policy solutions for addressing those threats? Importantly, in media content and discourse analysis, this is one nuance I really want to stress here because I think it's interesting and important. There's more than one way that a piece of information in the news can be wrong. One way that I think is really cool is called aggregate coverage bias. And this occurs when, let's say, there are 5 issues that are equally important. If one of those issues is covered by the media much more often, even if every individual fact presented is correct, the audience would wrongly believe that that issue is much more important just by virtue of the coverage. And a classic example of this is stories of Hillary Clinton's emails during the 2016 election, which was analyzed, and it's not just a meme on leftist social media, it's really a thing that happened. There's also demonstrably false information. Not my opinion is different from you. You said something factually wrong, and information that might be correct, but it's presented misleadingly due to lack of broader context. So we identified about 2,200 popular press articles that were published in the English-speaking world over the last decade. And I had a team of 10 readers who read those articles. These included undergraduate researchers under my supervision, and they answered 76 questions for every single article. Some of these were presence-absence questions, such as, does this article mention climate change, yes or no? Some of them were a little more nuanced. For those of you not familiar with the IUCN Red List, if you're colorblind, I apologize. It's not me who hates you. This is their official color scheme. But warmer colors here mean more endangered, with red being critically endangered. This is the number of articles about each species, color-coded by IUCN Red List status. The most critically endangered species, the ones in the most need of attention, the ones in the most need of awareness raising, in 2,200 articles were mentioned 21 times total. You would be well informed about what's going on with gray white sharks, which are, again, not the most endangered species, but you would not know what's going on with species that more need attention. So let's talk about threats to sharks again. Remember, shark fin trade is not the biggest or only significant threat and is declining. The shark meat trade is a bigger threat that is expanding and also is more relevant to the daily lives of most people reading stuff in English language newspapers. You would not know that from reading these articles. Shark finning and the shark fin trade was mentioned in 5.5 times as many articles as the shark meat trade, a clear case of aggregate coverage bias of dealing with one threat. So are threats to sharks covered in a factually accurate manner with appropriate context? They are not. What about policy solutions? Again, you have your target-based policies, which focus on sustainable fisheries management, making fisheries more sustainable. And you have your limit-based tools, focusing on trying to ban all fishing for sharks or ban all trade in shark products. Limit-based tools were mentioned much more often than target-based tools. I want to do a couple specific comparisons to highlight for you here. First, talking about shark fin trade bans. This is a policy that I personally am quite skeptical of. I wrote a couple of papers in marine policy about it, but there are folks in this room who work for organizations that work on this. I'm grateful for your collaboration on other matters, so I won't get too into the weeds here. But I will note that this one policy was mentioned in more than twice as many news articles as all sustainable fisheries management tools combined. So even if you like shark fin trade bans, which since we wrote this paper have become law in the US, this is another clear case of aggregate coverage bias. I also want to highlight these consumer boycotts, which I have not categorized as limit-based or target-based, but we charitably called these other. You can read that dripping with sarcasm. These are one small nonprofit. They have one employee and a few volunteers, and they find these well-known, often beloved brands, and that have a very tenuous connection to ocean conservation issues, and they stage these flashy protests. These get more coverage than all sustainable fisheries management tools combined, despite not being a thing. You may be wondering, hey, David, why is Starbucks on here? What does Starbucks have to do with the global shark fin trade? Well, so when Starbucks sells their coffee in Southeast Asia, they go through a food importer, exporter, distributor. That food importer, exporter, distributor is owned by a holding company, which owns about 10,000 food-related businesses in Asia. One of those is a restaurant that serves shark fin soup. That's it. That is why we had protests at Starbucks headquarters to save the sharks. And this gets more media attention than all sustainable fisheries management tools combined. We'll note that a consumer boycott was of a Atlantic City hotel chain that was serving shark fin soup was responsible for these, I swear to God, real tweets. Sharks are last on my list, other than the losers or haters of the world. It was actually hard for me to go back and find this because I am blocked by that individual on social media. So our policy solutions covered in a factually accurate manner with appropriate context, they're not. Overall, would you be well informed about this issue by reading the newspaper? You would not be. You would wrongly believe that shark finning and the shark fin trade is the only significant threat to sharks. You would wrongly believe that banning the shark fin trade is the only solution, or that these consumer boycotts have some role to play in saving the ocean. So I will also note that these media content and discourse analyses, I've done these for a variety of different environmental fields. Most recently, we had one come out about people's pet cats and songbirds and how media coverage covers that debate. So if you're interested in learning how the popular press covers your environmental field, I'd love to work with you on this as well. So now let's talk about infotainment documentaries, specifically Shark Week. For those of you who do not know, who have not followed me on social media for years, I know there are several in the room who have, I rant about this a lot, but let's talk, we actually did some science about it to back it up. So what is Shark Week? Shark Week is a week-long series of sarcastic air quotes documentaries that airs on the Discovery Channel, and it is the longest running cable event in history. It is marine biology's biggest stage, and it is a dumpster fire of lies, pseudoscience, and nonsense. To give you an example of this, one of these is a real Shark Week episode title from a few years, or from the last few years, and the others are ones I made up this morning to mock Shark Week. I'm going to have you vote on which ones you think are real. Who thinks Great White Serial Killer Fatal Christmas is real? Who thinks Jackass Does Shark Week 2 is real? Who thinks Naked and Afraid of Sharks 2 is real? Who thinks The Haunting of Shark Tower is real? Who thinks Real Monsters of the Bermuda Triangle is real? And who thinks Mecha Shark Lover Down Under is real? They are, of course, all real. So how do we know that this is bad? We checked. We did another one of these media content and discourse analyses. In this case, we had 2 poor undergraduate volunteers who watched all of Shark Week ever and wrote down what was in it. 202 hours of whatever the hell this is. This is published in PLOS One, and I wrote an op-ed about it in The Conversation. It's not just what I call typos, which are saying that this species can get 23 feet long when it's really 21 feet long. But who cares? That's not right, but it doesn't matter. It's egregious lies, such as the claim that Megalodon, which is the giant shark that they have one of at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum, or at the National Aquarium, they have jaws you can pose in. Shark Week claimed that this animal is not extinct, it's alive, it's an active threat to you and your family, and also scientists in the government know that, and you should not trust them. My colleagues at NOAA got death threats over this special for months. I give public talks a lot. I can't remember the last time no one asked me, is Megalodon real? And the most horrifying thing I've ever had happen in my career of public science engagement is the year after this, they aired this special called Megalodon, the New Evidence, which used real criticism that the first show received, including mine, and said, look how deep the conspiracy goes. They also lie to scientists to get them to appear on shows. They say, you're going to be in a special about hammerhead sharks, your area of expertise. And then what airs is Hitler the Magic Hammerhead. That's a real thing that happened. And they edit this in such a way so it looks like the scientists are responding to questions they were never really asked. At least one of my colleagues was fired as a result of appearing on one of these shows. Not good. It also presents fringe lunatics as credible experts. The most featured expert in the history of Shark Week is Andy Casagrande. Here you can see him advocating for people to go scuba diving with great white sharks while taking LSD. Please don't do that. We also have here a still for the short-lived show, reality competition show, Shark Academy with Dr. Riley Elliott, in which people did a series of stupid reality show challenges to compete for a spot in the lab of Dr. Riley Elliott. This show was canceled when it was revealed that Riley Elliott did not have a lab or a PhD. But there's no time for science because we're doing this. It is also a disaster for representation. My field is more than 2/3 women by membership, according to our latest demographic survey. You would not know that from watching Shark Week, which not only features more men than women, it features more men named Mike than women. That is an Instagram post from Mike Rowe, as in Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe, who is also a guy named Mike who appeared in multiple Shark Week specials. He was big mad about the Washington Post coverage of our story. That was my Facebook profile picture for a year. Screw that guy. But also the most common locations where Shark Week takes place are Mexico, South Africa, and the Bahamas, but they almost never feature any local experts. They fly in a white guy from halfway around the world rather than help the career of someone who actually works there and actually knows this stuff. So not great. Shark Week claims, well, maybe there's all this nonsense, but it gets people to watch and that raises awareness of shark conservation. Nonsense. In 202 episodes, there were 6, not 60, 6 actionable things that they ever asked their audience of millions to do to save sharks. And 4 of those were don't eat shark fin soup, which most people watching Shark Week are already not doing. It is extremely common for an hour-long special of fear-mongering nonsense with all this graphic violence reenacting sharks biting people, then have closing credits, and there's a soft voice narrating at the end. Actually, sharks aren't that dangerous, and they're in trouble. You should save them. That's not conservation. I don't know what the hell it is, but it's not conservation. So the most widely viewed and supposedly educational content about shark science and conservation uses egregious lies and wildly inaccurate claims. It's the only thing it ever mentions, which it doesn't mention much, is shark fin soup, and it promotes fringe lunatics and does not give credible experts, especially diverse experts, access to its platform, which absolutely has made careers in life. So finally, let's talk about the environmental nonprofit sector. I wanted to know here, from the perspective of environmental advocates, how does science influence their policymaking? Specifically, I wanted to know if they think science matters for policymaking. Where do they get their science? Does all relevant science reach them? And do they work towards the stated policy preference of scientific experts as represented by my past survey? Or do we have an effort-goal mismatch on our hands? So we distributed a voluntary online survey to every environmental nonprofit employee in the English-speaking world whose portfolio broadly included shark conservation advocacy or public education. These are not the staff scientists for these nonprofits. These are the advocates. These are the educators. That's 78 nonprofits. We had 84 people respond. So more than a 50% response rate. If you've ever done a survey, you know that that's a lot. It's because people wanted to talk about this. This included some of the most responses came from groups that work on a variety of ocean issues, including but not limited to sharks, like Oceana or the Marine Conservation Society. The next largest group was All We Do Is Sharks, like Shark Advocates International, based here in DC, or the Shark Trust in the UK. And then we also had some of the mega NGOs like WWF or the Nature Conservancy that they do everything on land, sea, and air represented. And we have responses from all over the world. At least every region had at least 3 responses. This is definitely biased towards North America and Europe, but that is not a survey sampling error. That's the population. There are just more nonprofits and more people working in this space in those areas. And first, do advocates believe that science matters for conservation policymaking? I got a range of responses here from, of course, science is essential. We can't do this without science. Some intermediate responses. Overall, science is really important, but that doesn't mean every individual unit of science is important. Tough but fair. And then a lot of concerns about the focus of scientific research and how it cannot possibly help. And that response actually turned into another paper that we had come out last year, which was advice for people who want their research to be policy relevant, with the understanding that a lot of it isn't, even though people claim it is. Next, where do advocates get their scientific information? Well, a majority of respondents, and again, these are not the staff scientists, these are the environmental advocates and the educators. They say, I read several scientific journal articles every month as part of my job. About 8% say, I've never in my life read a peer-reviewed scientific journal article, and more than half say, I've even been a co-author on a peer-reviewed scientific journal. What about if you want to learn more about science? More than half said there are scientists who work for my nonprofit and their job is to answer our questions as advocates and educators. I can just go down the hall and say, I have a question about what does this mean? There are also formal scientific advisory boards of volunteer scientists who don't work for the nonprofit. I volunteer on a lot of these. Anyone here looking to help with conservation, this is a great way to do it. And 10% said, I have never spoken to a scientist in any capacity in my life. Those are the same people who said, I've never read a peer-reviewed scientific journal article, just the denominator is different because not everyone responded to every question. So does all relevant science reach them, or is this happening? You've seen these green bars before. The blue bars are what environmentalists said in response to the same questions. A narrow majority of environmental advocates say that sustainable shark fisheries are possible. A plurality said that they currently exist, that there are real examples of it, and 78% said the goal of shark conservation advocacy should not be a total ban on all fishing and trade, it should be making fisheries more sustainable. So less than scientists, significantly less, but still a lot. So I looked at what variable most explains the variation in respondents here. That's called the primary partitioning variable on this question of should the goal be a total ban or should it be making fisheries more sustainable. Of our respondents in the environmental sector who say, I regularly read the peer-reviewed scientific journal literature, 90% of them prefer sustainable fisheries over bans, exactly the same number as scientists. But among respondents who say they rarely or never read the scientific literature, it was about 50-50. I also asked them to characterize the state of shark science. A plurality said the science is still uncertain. We have not yet figured out if sustainable shark fisheries can and do exist. That's not correct. We have, as I said at the start here, that doesn't mean we should do it, but we know we can, we know it has been done. The next largest group said the science is clear, sustainable shark fisheries can and do exist. And 12% of respondents said the science is clear, sustainable shark fisheries are impossible and have never been done, which is factually incorrect. Those are the same people who said, I've never talked to a scientist and I've never read a scientific journal article. They're very confident opining on the state of the science. Some people were skeptical of this and said, I've never seen evidence that it would be possible to have a sustainable shark fishery. That's someone who's never read a paper or talked to a scientist, so I don't know where they're looking for evidence. The intermediate responses like sustainable shark fisheries are possible, but that doesn't mean you can make any individual fishery sustainable, fair enough. And then a lot of support for the idea of sustainable shark fisheries. And finally, I wanted to look at these specific policy preferences. A majority of respondents in the environmental sector said in the last 5 years, my nonprofit has worked on sustainable fisheries management tools in some capacity. About a quarter said they've worked on shark fin trade bans. About 20% said they've worked on shark sanctuaries. This is a weird number because that's 11 respondents said they've worked on shark sanctuaries. Shark sanctuaries were a brand term by the Pew Environment Group. There were 4 people who worked on that team. So I do not know who these other 7 people are, but they think they're working on something that they absolutely did not work on. I have no explanation. This stacked bar chart shows opposition or support for different policies. Greens means I support this policy. Red means I oppose it. Among the environmental nonprofit sector, there is more support, more green for sustainable fisheries management tools versus shark fin sanctuaries and trade bans, and more opposition, more red for shark sanctuaries and shark fin trade bans than sustainable fisheries management tools, though those latter tools did have more support here than when I asked the same question to scientists earlier. So these shark fin trade bans, again, this is a policy that I am personally skeptical of, though it is now law. The primary partitioning variable here that best explains the difference in responses of do you support this policy or not is do you believe sustainable shark fisheries exist? And that makes sense. If you believe that something can't exist, of course you're not going to support a policy that's based on it. But here, again, it is a fact that they do exist. So among people who believe that sustainable shark fisheries do exist, about 25% support shark fin trade bans. Among people who believe they do not exist, 100% support shark fin trade bans. And again, the people on the left here are factually incorrect. That doesn't mean we should do that, but can we do it? Yes, we can, and it has been done. This is my favorite graph that I've ever made because it doesn't show that everyone who disagrees with me is wrong, and I would never claim that. But it does say that everyone who's wrong disagrees with me, and that is almost as satisfying to say. So why do people support bans? There are people who say, well, people should not eat shark. They're not food. Sustainable fishing is not possible. We have to ban things. And there were also people who said we should not kill any animal to eat it anywhere in any capacity. That was, I'm sure you're not surprised to learn, someone from North America, not from the global south, where perhaps that's less of an option. People who support sustainability said sustainable fisheries management works, let's do that. There were concerns about the blanket nature of these bans. I didn't go into much detail here, but it's not saying this endangered species, no fishing for it, but this a non-endangered species, you can fish for it. They say no shark fishing. So there were concerns about this, and there were concerns that banning a fishery would simply drive it underground where it's harder to track it. So do advocates believe that science matters for conservation? In general, yes, but not always. Where do advocates get their scientific information? Mostly the same way that scientists do, from talking to other scientists and from reading the peer-reviewed journal literature. Does all science reach them? No, bad news reaches them. Everyone knows the exact correct statistics on how many sharks are endangered, but the solutions were not as widely known. And do we have an effort-goal mismatch? There's strong evidence here of an effort-goal mismatch of at least some sectors of the environmental community working towards a policy that's mutually exclusive with what scientific experts prefer. So overall conclusions for this whole presentation: the popular press overwhelmingly covers one threat out of many and one set of policy solutions out of several. The most widely viewed sarcastic air quotes documentaries do not accurately portray the threat to sharks or their solutions, to put it mildly. And people are more aware of threats than they are of solutions. At least some environmental nonprofit groups work against the stated policy preferences of scientists. So why do so many people believe that sustainable shark fisheries can't and don't exist? Back to my original question, because there's a lot of confusing, contradictory, or factually incorrect information out there. And if you are learning about this issue from any source other than the peer-reviewed scientific journal literature, you are very likely learning at least some information that is not factually accurate. And that is true of a lot of issues, but it is super duper true of sharks. I have colleagues who do this misinformation, disinformation work in other capacities. People who work on much more controversial topics like plastic pollution or climate change or GMO foods, and they're shocked at how much nonsense is out there about sharks. So is that bad? I would say yes. Misinformed or underinformed citizens support different policy solutions than experts, which leads to suboptimal policy outcomes or even conflict between groups. I'll also note that while we're arguing about how to best save sharks, sharks very much still need to be saved. That is how many sharks people kill in a year, and compared to how many sharks are killed by people during the time I've been giving this talk. And I'll note that that is a very much zoomed in chart. So while we are arguing about how to do this, it still very much needs to be done. What can we do about it? I wish more scientific and technical experts join me in talking to the public, join me in volunteering their expertise to work with the environmental sector, and join me in speaking to journalists who cover these issues. And it would be great if academia world counted this stuff more, because for far too many of my colleagues who want to do it, it's something they have to do in addition to their other leadership and service with respect to hiring and tenure and promotion. So doing this is an enormous time and energy suck. And if you have to do it in addition to everything else, lots of people just don't. So I would like to thank everyone for coming out on a Friday to listen here. I'd like to thank the Earth Commons team, especially Jesse, Randall, and Priscilla for helping to set this up. I'd like to thank my many collaborators and funders, especially my poor undergraduates who had to watch 200 hours of Shark Week. Funding and support for this came from the Liber Eero Postdoctoral Fellowship in Conservation Leadership. If any grad students are here and are trying to figure out what's next, this is the best thing I've ever done. I love it, and I would love to talk to you about it. Thank you so much for listening. A lot of these arguments are summarized in this paper from 2024, The Causes and Consequences of Public Misunderstanding of Shark Conservation. I invite you to follow me on social media, @WhySharksMatter, to learn more about ways that you can help. And I would love to take your questions if I've left with any time. Thank you.
Plenty of time for that.
Great. What can I answer for people? Please.
Can you give an example of what a shark or a sustainable fishery looks like?
Sure.
Like the basics of that are.
Absolutely. So sustainable fisheries is actually the subject of my second book coming out later this fall. But generally speaking, and there are competing definitions here, but generally speaking, we're talking about a fishery that does not overfish. They leave enough fish in the population so that the babies will replace what's taken. Has limited impacts on the surrounding environment through bycatch and habitat loss, is based on data, and has rules in place to make sure that that's followed. A specific example of one?
No, I'm like wondering, is it like, so that's like a fishery is different than like a fish farm?
These are generally referring to wild fisheries, but fish farms, aquaculture, there are sustainable and unsustainable practices as well, but it's that what they're judged on is a little different.
Thank you.
How was that, Erica? Excellent. The North American Director of the Marine Stewardship Council in the front row here. As I'm asked to quickly define what is a sustainable fishery. What else can I answer for folks? Please.
I think in some types of fish, there's a lot of concerns about bycatch. Is that usually a problem with sharks, or is that less of a concern here?
It's a great question. It's about bycatch. So bycatch is when you're trying to catch something and you accidentally catch something else that was swimming near it. And if your only experience with fishing is using a rod and reel, and you catch one thing at a time if you're lucky, you probably have a hard time visualizing what bycatch is. But when we're talking about industrial scale fisheries, this can be a net that's a mile long. This can be a long line that has 50,000 baited hooks on it. So you're going to catch not just tuna, but sea turtles and birds that were near the tuna. Yes, bycatch is a big threat for sharks, absolutely. But there are solutions to this. So I just had an article about this on our blog, Southern Fried Science, still the most widely read ocean science blog, earlier this week, which is this bycatch reduction technology, which is a way to still catch the tuna, but catch less of the sea turtles and the sharks. I think it's the most important area to invest ocean conservation research in. There's a lot of Silicon Valley tech bros who are trying to invent solutions to things that are not really problems. This is something we really need help with, is better fishing gear. Great question. Hi.
I'm Anna, I'm a former student.
How's it going?
Good. I was just wondering about the term sustainability and if you think there's a science column like mismatch with that term, because before I came to college and learned environmental science, I actually never knew the definition of what sustainability was. And there actually is like a scientific definition of it. So when you're talking about sustainable fisheries and people don't believe that it exists, do you think that people just don't know what the term sustainability means?
That's a great question. And what exactly does this word mean? And are people confused about that is a huge problem in any kind of environmental advocacy. And it is not helped by there being 100 different organizations that all have different definitions. So is that part of the confusion? Absolutely. But I would say that I don't know exactly what it means is a different problem than I believe that it is impossible. Does it contribute? Maybe. Great question. Thanks. Please.
Thanks for the talk. That was awesome. I feel like I face the same challenges in my work, but I'm curious if you think that there was a more robust market for sustainably managed sharks. Like if you could walk into Whole Foods in Washington, D.C. and buy an appropriately managed shark, do you think that people would be more interested in management? Like if buying a sustainable product was trendy, and if so, why don't we see that market more widespread?
Yeah, a good question. So Whole Foods is actually a leader in grocery store sustainable seafood stuff. And they do have other products, but they, at least around here, they don't carry shark. I know that some of them used to. I believe that it is becoming more trendy, and places like Whole Foods, which have been long trendsetters in the industry, are helping to make environmentally friendly products more trendy. They are also doing a variety of other nonsense that we can rant about another time, but they are a force for mostly good. I would like to see more consumer education about why it matters that something is sustainable. And I wouldn't necessarily consider it a win if suddenly everyone went out and tried to eat as much shark as they could. So there's plenty of valid reasons why you might not want to do that, especially just like tuna or swordfish if you're pregnant or may become pregnant. But promoting more sustainable management techniques and more sustainable supplies is good for the ocean, because people are eating this stuff, and right now too many of them don't care where it comes from. So I'd like to see more consumer education stuff, and grocery stores can play a role in that for sure. I will say that the Publix near my parents' house in Florida, the seafood counter sells 3 different kinds of shark meat. So you can find this. I will also say, since this is a DC audience, you guys like this wonkery stuff. US Senator Elizabeth Warren, who has been a hero of the environmental left on a lot of things, tried to get the USDA to buy excess spiny dogfish caught by Massachusetts fishermen and serve it in public school cafeterias. And that is an existing program that was primarily used for agriculture stuff, for crops, but she tried to get it to use for shark meat, and the USDA said, no, we're not going to do that. Thanks. Please.
I was wondering, in countries where the fin trade was banned, was the meat trade also, like, did it start declining? Or?
A great question. So here in the US, the shark fin trade is now illegal. We are still catching and killing the same number of sharks. We're just throwing out the fins and selling meat. There are dumpsters and fishing ports in Massachusetts that are just full of shark fins. So the animals are still dying. Part of the support for this, and there were some very thoughtful people who were supportive of this and had a theory of change that I didn't agree with, but I certainly understood. Part of the public support for this was misunderstanding what shark finning means, and people believing that it refers to killing any shark in any way for any reason. And people have been shocked to say, what do you mean we're still killing sharks? We made it illegal. No, we did not. Yes, please.
I think at the start of your talk, you can correct me, but you were talking about how you do that trip to tag sharks.
Mhm.
And so can you talk about what data that gets and what part of your research that data informs?
Absolutely. So this is one of the other courses I teach at Georgetown. We will be offering it, I believe, next spring 27. And this is Field Research Methods in Marine Biology. Students get to plan a research project and then we go into the field and collect data with it. It was a lot of fun. But the shark research component of this, it is some of my grad school collaborators that now run this research program, and they're collecting data. I think Catherine says she has 31 master students right now. So we're collecting data for 31 different projects, depending on what we catch. And you take a variety of samples, measurements, blood samples, muscle samples, skin samples. We apply different types of telemetry tags to track the sharks. We collaborate with colleagues all over the country, and it used to be some in Canada, but with current nonsense, it's harder to do that, to get scientific samples abroad. And it's, if you ever read any of that lab's papers, the acknowledgements always thank, and numerous field volunteers. That's you. But we will be offering that in the spring, and it's up to 10 students can take the class.
This is a follow-up to Constantina's question, but what regions of the world, or like what all those cultural norms play in the kind of boom that's happened with shark meat trade, and as the fin trade has gone down? Do you know what some of the reasoning behind that is?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's in some cases people that were sort of always eating shark meat, and in some cases it were people that we want cheap protein and we don't really care what it is. In France, Spain, and Portugal, there's always been significant shark and skate in particular, shark relative consumption. South America, it's really increased in the last 10, 20 years, and a lot of that is because of just there's a growing population and people need to eat something. And suddenly this new thing was available in the marketplace. There was a really cool investigative journalism series by Manga Bay. If you guys don't read Manga Bay, you definitely should. It's awesome. But they uncovered in Rio de Janeiro that government officials were serving shark meat in school to public school children, but saying it was tuna. And this uncovered that it was not tuna, and it resulted in some people getting fired and that not happening anymore. But so culture is some of it. A lot of it is just people need to eat something. There are a desire for a sustainable work ethic, caring about the environmental impact of your daily choices. That is in many ways, that's a luxury. You can afford to care about the environmental impact of your daily choices once you and your family have food. Making it easier and cheaper to make things more sustainable is good for everyone.
I have another question. So in a Greek island, like in the 50s, there was an attack and people went mad afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
And they started hunting the sharks because they decided that they don't want sharks anymore on the Greek sea. So I'm wondering, what's the role of fear in hunting?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. But that's primarily looking for individual large sharks. Whereas most of the sharks that are eaten for their meat are things, in the US at least, we're talking about spiny dogfish. A big one is about that big. And a blacktip, a big one, is a little bit bigger than me. So people are not eating great whites, or very, 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 very rarely. So I would say it's different species, but some people don't know that sharks are more than one thing. When I do my public talks, especially when there are kids in the audience, I have them shout out for 30 seconds all the different shark species they can think of. And I think the most we've ever gotten is 25. There are 548 species of sharks. And people just think of shark as Jaws, but it's really a wide variety of things. So I'm sure that's some of it. This last year was the 50th anniversary of Jaws, and we did a lot of conservation retrospective things. And the consensus seems to be not that Jaws and fear of sharks made people want to go out and kill sharks, but that it made it harder to get people to care about bycatch and habitat loss, because they've said, like, oh, if the only things being hurt are sharks. Good question. How are we doing for time? All right, couple more. Yeah, I saw your hand in the back first.
Yeah, I know that like with sustainable fisheries, like marine protected areas, like the policing and the regulation of like what they're actually taking is really hard. And I was wondering, like, I'm sure that comes into play with sustainable shark fishing and like what you found, if there's any like good practices or ways forward for that.
Yeah, any environmental regulation, if it's not enforced or if it's not enforced well, there are going to be people who break it. There are in marine protected area management, which are generally speaking, we're talking about no fishing zones. There are lots of times where the penalty for being caught illegally fishing is less than the profit you would get from getting away with it once. And that doesn't increase with more violations. So if I'm a fisherman, that's not incentive for me to not do that. So there's new technologies that are useful for enforcement. Stronger laws are important for enforcement. Education is important to get people to care about this. How these rules are set is really important. People need to have a seat at the table where regulations that affect their livelihoods are made. There was a story in Indonesia a few years ago where there was a Western nonprofit-led campaign to ban shark finning in this province in Indonesia. And it succeeded, but it was top-down government getting money from a Western nonprofit. They banned shark fishing, and suddenly all these people had fast boats and no job. And what did they do? They started human trafficking. And this is presented as a win for conservation circles. So it's that enforcement and smart regulation and involving people is very important in all of this. Yes, please.
The last question.
Last question, and then I'll be here for the happy hour. Yeah.
I was just wondering, there's a lot of conversation, obviously, in fishery spaces about fishing down the food chain and how we're moving toward smaller species that are lower on the food chain. Considering that sharks are relatively high consumers, is that relationship there at all? Is there a moving down to smaller shark species, or are we getting to more unconventional shark species? Has that been happening lately?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So fishing down the food chain, what we're talking about here is people used to target the big tuna, and now there are no more big tuna, so we go for the medium-sized snapper. And in some cases, there's none of that anymore, so people are going for smaller and smaller fish. That is happening to some extent with these shark species. Also, an emerging problem with this is we have new technologies that make it easier to access deep sea for fishing than has previously been the case. So there's this emerging market for deep sea shark liver oil that 10 years ago, it was like not commercially feasible to catch these animals at all, and now it is. So that's fishing. It's more fishing down the water column, but we have some of that for sure.